It was August 2011. There was an article in Wall Street Journal, and Mark Andreessen, the god of Silicon Valley, said the software is going to eat the world. And boy, it ate the world for next 10, 11 years, and now AI is going to eat the world. But behind that eating the world, there is a force to reckon with, was open source software, OSS. And same thing is going to happen with the AI. The Llama and the Falcon LM and the Claude and all those open source large libraries are already there. And most importantly, the tools to build applications using those LLM. And we are fortunate to have the executive director of Linux Foundation, Jim Zemlin, to tell us how the open source software is going to impact the world of AI, who is going to eat the world for at least next 20 years or so. Please welcome Jim Zemlin.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. How many of you here have heard of the Linux Foundation? How many people here use Linux? All right, that's good to know. That's good to know. I'm in a very friendly audience. I've been working at the Linux Foundation for 20 years. I've worked with so many IIT alumni over the years. I mean, it's just an incredible diaspora of brilliant people, and it's just an honor to be able to be here today. You know, the Linux Foundation has grown quite a lot in the last 20 years that I've been working there. And, you know, Linus Torvalds and I sometimes talk about how, you know, we never really thought that things would get this big and this successful. I don't really think Linus cares all that much, but I'm pretty excited about it. Today, the Linux Foundation has the support of thousands of companies. Every day in our communities, hundreds of thousands of developers work on some of the most consequential technology that we rely on every day. One thing I think is important to remember about open source software is it's just a carnival of riches, but it's also the curse of choice in that there are millions of open source projects out there, and it's really hard to choose which ones are important. Because when you're starting a company, whether it's in generative AI or really any technology, software comes with an implicit futures contract. Is this technology going to be around for a long time? If I pick the right programming language, there's going to be a huge labor force. It's going to be something that's accessible. If I pick the wrong one, it might go away and I'll have to rewrite everything that I've already done. And so at the Linux Foundation, what we focus on is really a very small number of open source projects like Linux, but those that are critical to industry and society. And we license those freely to everyone in a neutral nonprofit so that industry, society, and all of you can count on it for years to come. How many people here thought that the Linux Foundation just worked on Linux? Just to show a hand, be honest. All right. You might be surprised that we actually work on a lot of other open source projects that you know already. We're sort of the organization behind things like Kubernetes. The Cloud Native Computing Foundation is in fact a part of the Linux Foundation. Node.js, the world's largest server-side JavaScript platform that's used to create most mobile applications and websites, that's a part of the Linux Foundation. RISC-V, the semiconductor technology, that's the fastest growing semiconductor tech in the world. That's part of the Linux Foundation. Whether it's in telecommunications, automotive, cybersecurity, or indeed in artificial intelligence and machine learning, the Linux Foundation plays an important part of that. In machine learning and large language models, PyTorch is a part of the Linux Foundation. We're home to that important project. Our job is really, really simple. What we want to do is take a great upstream open source project like PyTorch. Think of me almost like a reverse VC. And instead of looking for product market fit, I'm looking for project market fit. And instead of monetizing the technology, I'm seeking to give it away. But they're kind of similar in that product market fit and project market fit are important, right? Is this a meaningful technology that can be widely used, that can make markets? And we work on those kind of open source projects like PyTorch. We then move to allow the industry to consume that technology in order to make products. PyTorch is a building block to create large language models and ML workflows and is used by the entire industry, the scientific community, to create amazing products that are changing the world. And then what happens is you get profit from those products. That profit is reinvested back into the project in the form of engineering hours and bug fixes, and then the project gets better, and that begets better products, and that begets more profits, and that's the virtual cycle that the Linux Foundation is here to support. By providing a neutral home for this important AI technology, we're able to allow people to bring together their resources in a trusted way. Microsoft and Google can work together because it's at a neutral home that they know the competitor's not going to run off with. You know, Linux being the best example of this. But a more recent example of this in the area of AI is PyTorch. So if you look at two projects, you have TensorFlow, which is a Google project. Google owns that project. It's freely available in terms of the source code, but they can control the commit bit and so forth. A couple years ago, Meta decided to contribute PyTorch to the Linux Foundation so that they could accelerate code development as other organizations would understand, hey, we're not contributing to a Meta-based project, we're contributing to a totally neutral commons. And you see the power just in the last year or so that that has created. PyTorch has become more of a de facto standard, and even though TensorFlow is still a great technology, the power of that trusted collective really shines through. This was the case in Kubernetes, it was the case in Linux, and so many things. So where does open source fit into generative AI? Well, I just couldn't help but bring up the classic market map eye chart to show you all that in order to get to a large language model or any machine learning application, you need a lot of other software to get there. To collect data, to clean data, to take out bias in data, to do inference, federated learning, all sorts of things to get to the final stage of a ChatGPT or any large language model. It requires a massive set of software to get there. The vast majority of that software is open source. And that is the most important thing for any entrepreneur, any organization that wants to leverage LLMs and generative AI, is to understand that if you really know what's going on in the open source community and you're able to assemble these building blocks effectively, you're going to be able to get to market faster, you're going to be able to co-innovate with your competitors even faster, and it'll allow for commercial success. Open source really accelerates all of this, but particularly the research and innovation part. You know, if you think about it, and I'll talk about this in a few minutes, when Llama 2 was released in the open source world, within a few weeks, the open source community had it running on Raspberry Pis. A couple weeks later, they had it tuned in a way that was giving ChatGPT level performance, but that tuning only cost a few $100s. It's just amazing what happens when you bring open technology out there and have people just provide feedback and incremental improvement. It really is fundamentally the fact that all of us are smarter than any one of us. And no matter how good large language models get at structured data and interpreting that and sort of commoditizing content and code, remember that content is not context, and writing is not thinking. And in the open source community, when you bring the creativity and thoughtful minds of hundreds of thousands of people together, you are going to get incredible innovation outcomes. Now, there's some challenges in creating large language models in open source. It's not all upside. One of the big challenges is access to data. And so one of the things we saw when large language model mania started late last year and early this year is, Stack Overflow and other large sets of human language and data starting to shut off access to their APIs, being, sort of creating data walled gardens, charging for that, which is all well and good. That's the prerogative of any business to be able to do that. One of the interesting things that we also saw at the Linux Foundation simultaneously was the increase in federated data sharing initiatives. One example that we started was something called the Overture Maps Foundation. This was Meta, Amazon, Microsoft, and TomTom getting together and sharing massive sets of high-fidelity geospatial data in order to use LLM technology to create better mapping experiences, augmented reality experiences, and more. I think we're going to see a lot more of common data sharing arrangements out there. And one of the things we did to help that was we created a common data license agreement, just like an open source license, that allows for much easier liquidity and sharing of data by having a common set of legal structures behind how that data actually gets shared. And these are just some of the challenges, but what, again, I'm seeing firsthand, the amount of rapid innovation in LLM technology is just unprecedented, right? And what my prediction is that open source is going to lower the cost of training. It's going to increase the effectiveness of these models at a pace that we've never seen before. And so with the last few minutes, I want to just give you all a call to action, especially you entrepreneurs in the room. You all depend on this code, and one of the things that's interesting is that large language models and this kind of technology gives you all an opportunity to make the code that you depend on to build your solutions even better in and of itself. And the way that you can do that is by helping in the actual development of the source code. Now, this is sort of a simplified way of how code flows, right? A developer creates it in source code, they build it, package it, and then they give it to the consumers who run it to use whatever they did. But I want to zero in on what's going on with open source developers as they're creating code and where generative AI, I think, is going to have some big impact. And some of this stuff hasn't been worked out yet. There's still risk around this. We just heard about a risk-based approach to technology, and some of the risk around using this technology is who owns the copyright? How can you comply with the open source licenses? Is it going to be problematic in terms of hallucinations or some other thing? And that's being solved by regulators, by the courts, and by technologists who are building into, for example, code completion tools, ways to understand the provenance of that code and the license under that code, and maybe training code under a permissive license so that code can be assured to be in compliance with the intellectual property rules of the data it was built upon. We're seeing companies like Microsoft say, hey, if there's a legal problem with GitHub Copilot, just like last week they announced, we'll pay for legal defense and any problems that come from that. So you can see this evolving. I think there's huge opportunities in the area of testing and debugging to use large language models to automate the testing work that so many developers really hate to do. This goes even more so for documentation. We've been playing with different tools that can create automated documentation for different open source projects and code bases. And for any of you developers in the room, we all can agree on one thing: developers hate writing documentation. So I think there's some rich opportunities. The final thought I want to leave you with, and the call to action, is don't build a regulatory moat around this technology. Today, there are people out in Washington. Mustafa Suleyman is a good example. He wrote a recent book and has talked about, should we even have open source LLMs? Based on a prediction 20 years from now that these LLMs will get so good that they'll put too much power into the hands of individuals and it can become dangerous. Regulation around this technology, in my opinion, is not going to work. It actually reminds me of encryption technology. Back in the 90s, when PKI was open sourced, the federal government regulated encryption technology as a military weapon. Phil Zimmerman, the author of an open source encryption technology was actually arrested. And eventually, the legal system equated open source in that case to free speech. We've seen this movie before. We know how it ends. Security through obscurity will not work. The access to the democratization of the technology that can change the world is just as equally important as the safeguards we can put in without trying to regulate in a way that blocks access to that technology for everyone. And so when you hear cries from large companies who already have the capital and they already have all the GPUs and they're already ahead in the race to regulate AI, in particular to regulate open source AI, you should think twice about that. And those people may actually have a motivation to regulate that AI because they're already ahead in the race. Think of it this way. If I was racing someone and they got a 10-minute head start and they sprinted the entire 10 minutes and then said all of a sudden, hey, I want to take a break, that would be dubious. And I think a little bit of that is going on as well. So resist calls to regulate this stuff and embrace the free, unfettered access to a collective wisdom that we can all build upon. Finally, my last call to action is join our communities. We have dozens of projects in the area of machine learning, AI, and big data. PyTorch is one of the fastest growing open source projects in the world, and we'd love to work with all of you. It's totally free. Anybody can join. You can use it for anything, and I look forward to working with all of you. And again, it's an honor to be able to speak here today. Thank you so much.